I was recording the Late Kick Extra podcast this morning, and what that is, for those of you who are new, and we have new viewers every single week, and listeners, since we're talking about a podcast, is I do 2 times a week just a mailbag. It's all listener Q&A. So on Tuesday morning and Thursday morning, if you subscribe to the Late Kick podcast, it's only on podcast. We don't put it on the YouTube channel. You can submit questions, and I try and answer in rapid-fire succession as many of them as I can. You can find me, joshpate706@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter, which I advise you to do anyway, @LateKickJosh, and you can send me a DM there. So this morning, I'm recording, and Otto sent us a great question. It was a few days old, because I hadn't recorded one in a little while. Election week threw us all off. And so I'm recording this morning, and Otto, who is a longtime friend of the program, he said, imagine, I'm paraphrasing him, imagine writing a letter to yourself in August. So I'm right here now, and I'm writing a letter to myself in the past. He said, what has happened that you'd like to warn yourself about? And so I thought I was going to be able to get it in like 2 minutes. I ended up going 14 and a half minutes this morning on this. And if you want to hear that answer, you can go listen to the podcast. But I just kind of want to reiterate it, because the more I thought through it, the more I said, this is a segment, especially because we got all these games postponed. This is a segment. You can think right along with me. I was doing a consultation with someone last night whose name is Richler, by the way. What a name, Richler. And that's the one his mom gave him. He didn't even have to pick that. Richler. And I was talking to him about this, and I was talking to some other folks about this week about, you got to be able to pivot. You can't be married to your preseason predictions. You got to be in tune with the subcurrent and the undercurrent of college football. You got to know what people are thinking. You got to know what fan bases are saying. And especially this year more than ever, you got to just be on your toes. Because the first thing that I would warn myself about in August is make sure that you require double validation for this year. We didn't have to wait long for this principle, this theory, if you will, to be in play. Remember week 1, where were you when? Where were you when Mike Leach went into Baton Rouge and took down LSU in overwhelming fashion? I mean, they drowned them. It was 44-34. KJ Costello has the Heisman wrapped up after week 1. He threw for the better part of a mile, it seemed like, on that Bo Pelini secondary, which we were told was in better shape than last year. How's that gone? And so there you were, right there in the front seat with Gina Davis and with Susan Sarandon, and it's the final scene in Thelma and Louise, and there you are, putting the pedal to the floorboard, driving straight off the cliff, hands in the air. Mike Leach has got every one of you. And then week 2 happened, and then week 3 happened, and then week 4 happened. Now, I didn't fall for that one, fortunately. A lot of you did, though, and so rest in peace to your preseason predictions there and your week 1 predictions, but that's okay, because I was gotten a few weeks later by Michigan. I so proudly and staunchly even sat here right at this desk after Michigan went into Minneapolis as just a short 3-point favorite, and they took down Minnesota. PJ Fleck and that very undermanned defensive front. Should have known better, Richard Marks, but I didn't. And so I actually put a video out that I have not deleted against my better judgment from the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. And Colin, if you'll remember, the thumbnail says, "The New Michigan." The New Michigan, yeah. So then week 2 happened, and then Michigan State happened. And then last week, week 3 happened, and then Indiana happened. And while the Michigan State result, you could say, all right, we got a perfect storm of a letdown situation and a rivalry game, and just everything goes wrong. Indiana just owned them. Like Indiana, it was almost like watching Alabama play South Carolina or someone like that. And Bama gets out to their big lead, and then backups are in, and Carolina, they got to chip away here or there, but then, Bama puts up another touchdown. It's that Indiana toyed with Michigan the other day. Indiana took their wide receivers and their quarterback, Penix, and they just bailout throw after bailout throw. I mean, it was very simple. There was nothing too complex about what they did, because that's how you attack Michigan. It's literally an attack. It's a psychological attack at this point when you throw at Michigan's corners, because it's rough. It's rough. You see this cantina? This cantina had more pass breakups than Michigan's DBs did Saturday. Try to get the props involved whenever I can. And so that leads me to my second point. My second thing that I would advise myself in August is be aware that there are going to be wet fuses, and you don't know where they're going to be. It could be where you least suspect it. If you've ever tried to light a wet fuse, it's pointless. Totally pointless. Doesn't matter if you take a blowtorch to it. You're not lighting a wet fuse. And the season, as it turns out, was already doomed. Penn State, I go back to the Nittany Lions, perfect example of a team that, for whatever reason, could be a million different reasons, it has become obvious that COVID-19, even though it did proportionately impact the sport, okay, everyone in the Big Ten largely has dealt with the same thing. You largely got the same amount of spring practices in. You found out the schedules at the same time. You had the same amount of fall practices. So it stands to reason you could, from a very broad 50,000-foot perspective, say there's going to be no excuses here because everyone's dealt with it. And so since everything is equal, relatively speaking, the expectation level and the comparative analysis should be no different than a regular season. You could say that. I just don't buy it. The more we've got into it, you have the wet fuse theory, as I like to call it, starting this morning, in effect, to the point where COVID has so disproportionately impacted some programs relative to others. Is it an excuse? I guess. I just think it's a valid excuse. How else do you explain what's happening with Penn State? How else do you explain that? Else do you look at a team that would otherwise be equipped to do pretty good things this year? They can't even get off the ground. That is the definition of a wet fuse, actually. It's just click, click, click. We can't light it. Dad, we can't light it. Did you buy us bad fireworks? I knew they were discounted for a reason. We can't light the fireworks. Like, that is Penn State right now. And so that leads me to my third point. And the third point is self. I'm writing to myself. Remember, self, back in August, make sure before you get into the heat of battle, and make sure before your emotions take over, so it's August, before the season, make sure you define the maximum weight of the 2020 college football season. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to go and get out into the season and then all of a sudden you're making snap judgments every week because you got wet fuses all over the place. And so you got some teams that look horrible and you're going to be ready to castigate the entire coaching staff after week 2 or week 3. You got to define what's the maximum weight. So if you got a scale of 0 to 10, normal season, the maximum could be 10. Let's say in August I decide, all right, with all the external factors in place, opt-outs and otherwise, some players have been sick, some quarterbacks have been quarantined, coaching staff and players' families are dealing with all kinds of issues that you don't even know about because they're not public. There are so many external factors that are unique, one-time deals, never going to deal with them again. Don't hold the sport to the same caliber standard that you normally do. Let's say the maximum weight that I'm going to give this season is a 6. Well, that probably means it's going to take drastically bad results for me to ever call anyone a hot seat candidate this year. That's where I am with James Franklin. I mean, if this were a normal year, this would be totally different. But I'm not there with him. I'm not there with Harbaugh, even though a lot of you Michigan folks are. And I understand in your mind, it extends well before 2020. I don't think many people were there before 2020 with James Franklin. So my philosophy on that is if I wasn't already there before, I'm probably not going to allow myself to be there afterwards. I think the one exception, if you've watched the show regularly, the one exception has been Tom Herman. There's a little bit of hypocrisy. I wrote it down. It's giant caps letters here, hypocrisy. I'm going to give myself one out there because what I believe about Herman in Texas, I think also extends before this. However, if you wanted to debate me on that and you wanted to throw my own theories back in my face, I wouldn't be able to push back against it too hard or else I'd sound like a politician. I mean, I could do it. Trust me, I could. I took several debate classes. But, yeah, outside of Tom Herman in Texas, I think most of that applies. And I'm not going past a 6 on the weighting of this year. But a lot of you put in the comments, and a lot of you tweeted at me today, and you probably will in this video too when we cut it, what would you write to yourself? Maybe you bet on this stuff a lot. Like, what would you write to yourself? You give yourself the winning lotto numbers.